Hi, I'm Peter Zuidema. My co-workers call me Zeter. And since we will be talking shop here, you can do so as well. All right. Today, we will talk about digital accessibility. Yes, that word that makes many designers and developers anxious. That causes many product owners and project managers nightmares, and that many executives are expecting to drive up costs unnecessarily. Well, if that is the accessibility that you're thinking about, and I think we're talking different things here, or sorry to say, you might not be doing it right. Oh yes, I went there. If you take the right approach to implementing accessibility into your digital products, your product should not have to cost more, and better yet, it might help make your product more effective, easy to use, and possibly be more profitable. I couldn't find a better win-win business decision. But that is trying to appeal to people who might not understand the real reason why we should make digital products accessible. It is simply the right thing to do. Let's dive into today's video, shall we? About 10 years ago, I thought I was a great UX designer, and I was very good at making my products accessible. After all, my software would pass any test I could throw at it. It was perfect. My products would pass accessibility compliance, about which I will talk more later, and it would pass with flying colors. And then I was invited to attend an empathy lab. That is an organized event where you will gain insight into how people experience the world in different ways, be it through belief, education, or something less voluntarily, like a disability. And at this empathy lab, I was blindfolded and asked to rely solely on a keyboard and screen reader to interact with my own product. It was nothing about how smooth it all went, but just whether my product made sense in the way it was presented information to the user, if they could not see it. And it failed miserably. Even while I knew how to interact with my own product, I was the designer after all, I was not able to. There was no rhyme or reason to how my product was shown to the user. And that opened my eyes, no pun intended, to the importance of accessibility. My pride? Down in the gutter. I was the one who claimed I was so great at creating accessible products simply because they passed accessibility compliance tests. My ego was shattered. And finally, I started to understand what accessibility was all about, and I honestly felt sorry for all people who have to deal with software created by people who claim it's accessible, only to find out it's impossible to use. I mean, think about it. You are required to file a document by the government, and it is impossible for you to find it on their website because even though somebody put an accessibility required description in the document, they just named it document 24 instead of tax form 1099. And my products were created for the educational sector. So imagine students, young students even, who might have an accessibility issue being unable to learn what they need because I, as a UX specialist with an overgrown ego, thought it was accessible enough. Yeah, that's what we're dealing with here. First of all, if someone talks to you about A11Y, understand that it means accessibility. Yep, it's a nifty way to say the word starts with a capital A, it's followed by 11 letters and ends with a lowercase y. If you want to really one-up them, tell them that if they write the last Y in uppercase, they're grammatically wrong. Anyway, accessibility is not so much about ensuring that people with disabilities can work with your product. It is more about making your product accessible to assistive technologies, which are used mainly by people who need extra help interacting with the world around them, such as people with disabilities. In other words, by designing and developing your product in a certain way, you ensure that everyone you expect to work with your product can actually access and use it. But, as I mentioned in my Empathy Lab anecdote, having an accessible product doesn't automatically mean you have a usable product. And don't underestimate the number of people who might be relying on assistive technologies to interact with, for example, a computer or mobile device. The World Health Organization estimates that about 2.5 billion people, yes, with a B, currently rely on assistive technologies to perform everyday tasks. We will be talking more about that in a moment, but think about wheelchairs, hearing aids, software that helps working with computers, etc. In the US alone, an estimated 25% of adults, about 60 million people, rely on some sort of assistive technology. And in Europe, we're talking about a roughly estimated 101 million people who rely on assistive technologies, about 27% even of the adult population. That's not really a number that we can easily ignore. So, what are assistive technologies? Basically, they're a form of technology that helps you interact with the world around you. That may include physical or digital products. Think about a braille reader that lets a visually impaired person read what content is displayed on a screen by dynamically creating braille content on a device that's similar to a keyboard. Think about a specific version of a mouse. Here I have two of them that can be used by someone who doesn't have all of their digits or maybe the use of their hand anymore. You can also think about people who have lost their ability to move and interact with a computer by eye movement or speech. But it can also be something much more simpler. For example, my glasses are an assistive technology, if you think about it. Without them, you would not want me to sit behind the wheel of a car. Without them, I would not be able to read content displayed on my monitor, or worse, on this teleprompter. It was a little bit panicked there. It can also be the hearing aid that you or someone else you know needs to use because otherwise they might not be able to hear everything clearly. But assistive technologies do not always have to be a physical product. It can also be software that helps people make their lives a little bit easier. For example, using Ctrl+ or Command+ to zoom in on software you use. Even turning your software into the now popular dark mode is a form of assistive technology. Or using a screen reader that reads the content on the screen, including instructions on how to interact with it. Keep in mind, a screen reader is something different than a narrator. I will get into this kind of knowledge in a future video because there's so much to talk about there. You're starting to see the picture here. There are so many people who rely on some form of assistive technology to interact with your product, whether for necessity or convenience. Regulations around the world, which you can check online to see which apply to your region, usually require you to make products accessible when creating products for regular consumers. There are reasons why you might be exempt, because you create products for businesses or you are a very small business yourself. But as you might understand, if you deliberately choose to forego creating an accessible product, you might actually alienate users. And no matter if you are exempt or not, you should really think about it if you can afford it. Why would you not make an accessible product? Designing or developing an accessible product doesn't necessarily have to take longer, be more expensive, or more difficult. Yes, many may think that it is a bold claim, and many professionals will be amongst them, but in a future video I will explain why I make that claim. However, by deliberately deciding not to create an accessible product, you might be simply telling a potential significant part of your users that you are not willing to support the technologies they use daily to use their devices. That means your product will not work as expected for these users, and that you actually tell them that you and your company do not care, even if competitors do. Guess what those users will be doing? I'll let you do the math there. Because it may sound like making a product accessible is a big undertaking. Actually, it is quite the opposite. Making a product accessible means keeping it as simple as possible. What can make it challenging to create an accessible product is introducing too many complex, customly made variations of basic functionalities that are available out of the box. If you design and develop your product using the simplest technologies users are accustomed to, and in a very usable, straightforward way they are familiar with, you're probably already 80% of the way there. But both designers, developers, and businesses often want to stick with things that might be all looks or based on frameworks that are too complex out of the box, but that they're used to working with. That is the biggest threat to making a good, accessible product. In other words, you might be making the product inaccessible without realizing it. Now, don't get me wrong. It doesn't mean you're bound to create a boring looking and simple application. Not at all. However, it is recommended that only designers and developers experienced in creating accessible products begin working on these more complex applications. I have been focusing on designing and developing accessible products for the last decade, with many of them that vary from simple to highly complex ones, and every one still needs the attention it deserves. But I stand by my statement. Creating an accessible product doesn't mean it will be more expensive or take longer to create. Once you have learned what it takes to make a compliant product, you cannot unlearn it. Like, well, riding a bike. Wait, what? A compliant product? Yeah, I have been saying that word now a couple of times. Compliant to what? When we say that a product is accessible, it is said to be WCAG compliant. Somebody really thought, like, let me come up with a great sounding, easy to pronounce abbreviation. WCAG, or WCAG, stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And these are authored and maintained by the W3C, another great abbreviation, or the World Wide Web Consortium, which has also been responsible for other web standards like HTML, CSS, and SVG, amongst other ones. How this works is simple. If you follow these guidelines and ensure that your product is compliant, other producers of assistive technologies will do the same, and they will all work together nicely, now and in the future. So WCAG is versioned. If you make your product compliant with, for example, WCAG version 2.1, all assistive technologies that support that version will work with it. And you don't have to worry about what assistive technology it is, or who it is for, or how complex it might be. And the same goes for the designers and developers of assistive technologies. If they want to interact with specific software, they have to ensure compliance, and they will instantly have a wide range of software to work with. All right, I can easily talk for hours more about this subject, and believe me, I will revisit this topic of accessibility many more times. Not only will I explain why creating an accessible product should not increase the time frame or budget, but I will also address best practices, tips and tricks for both designers and developers, and provide motivation and reasoning for project managers and product owners. But the world of accessibility is a much more exciting one than most people might expect. By embracing accessibility and supporting assistive technologies, you might create compelling applications that collaborate with assistive hardware and software, and thereby improving usability and user experience, even for people who do not require assistive technologies. Anyway, that will all come later, but for right now, I hope I have piqued your interest. Oh, and one more tip. No matter how excited you now might be about accessibility, which would be weird, and you cannot wait to start reading WCAG and ARIA, another thing that I will explain in another video, it is slightly less than 400 printed pages, and to be honest, it's not a real page turner. There is a reason why it's not on the Times bestseller list. But you should bookmark it and keep it available to you at all times and start referencing it when you need it. All right, it's time to wrap up. If you enjoy these videos, please subscribe to this channel. It will help me out. And if you have any questions or ideas for other videos, please leave them in the comments below. Until next time, thank you so much for watching.